Parents kicked me out. Lottery hit next morning. Now, guess who's homeless? That's the punchline. But before you laugh, you need to hear the setup to the universe's sickest joke. It began with me, Tyler Miller, standing on the curb across the street from my own home, drowning. Not in the torrential Oregon downpour that was already soaking through my hoodie and pasting my hair to my skull, but drowning in the silence. The house stood there, windows dark save for the flickering blue glow of the television in the living room, my fortress, my sanctuary, my prison for 25 years. Now, it was just a building that held the two people who had just excised me from their lives like a tumor. The final words still echoed in the space between my ears, louder than the storm. They weren't just angry, they were surgical. My father, Frank, his face a mask of purple rage, had jabbed a finger at my chest. I look at you, and I don't see a son. I see a parasite. 25 years of feeding a black hole of wasted potential. We are in foreclosure because of this money pit of a house. And we sure as hell can't afford to carry you anymore. You are a luxury we can no longer afford. A bill I am done paying. A bill. That's what I was. My mother, Linda, ever the pragmatist, had delivered the killing blow with the icy calm of an executioner. He's right, Tyler. It's just numbers. We have to cut our losses. Your presence here is a financial liability. She didn't even look at me. Her eyes were on the chipped laminate countertop, as if she were calculating a budget. In that moment, I wasn't her child. I was a negative entry on a ledger. The argument had ignited over my car a beat-up Civic that had finally died in the driveway. But it was never about the car. It was about the mortgage they were behind on, the second jobs they refused to get, and the lifetime of resentment they'd stored up, looking for a target. Tonight, I was that target. When I tried to argue, to defend the small shred of dignity I had left, Frank had snapped. He grabbed the world's #1 dad mug I'd bought him years ago, a stupid, hopeful gift, and hurled it into the sink, where it exploded into 100 tiny pieces. That's what I think of your contributions, he'd roared. Then came the shove. Not a gentle push, but a hard, two-handed shove that sent me stumbling backward toward the door. Get out! Get your useless junk and get out of my house! I didn't fight. I didn't scream. A cold, terrifying numbness washed over me. I walked upstairs in a daze, my feet feeling like lead weights on the familiar creaking steps. I packed a duffel bag with trembling hands, stuffing in clothes, my laptop, and a few worthless mementos from a life that now felt like a complete fiction. The last thing I grabbed, on a whim of pure, pathetic desperation, was the lottery ticket I'd bought at the 7-Eleven earlier that day. A flimsy slip of paper promising a 1 in a million chance at a different life. The deadbolt clicking shut behind me was the sound of an amputation. Now, standing in the rain, watching the house, a vibration in my pocket jolted me back to reality. My phone. A text alert from my bank. Your current balance is $87.34. $87.34. That was my net worth. The sum total of my existence. I pulled my hand from my pocket, my fingers brushing against the lottery ticket. I almost laughed. A hollow, broken sound that was swallowed by the wind. I was homeless, worthless, and disowned. What could a $1 piece of paper possibly do in that moment? Drenched and shivering, I felt like the loneliest man on earth, the butt of a cosmic joke. The thing is, I hadn't heard the punchline yet. The universe was just clearing its throat. The room at the Starlight Inn was a symphony of beige walls, beige carpet stained with ghosts of past misfortunes, and a beige bedspread that felt like sandpaper. The air tasted of stale cigarettes and industrial cleaner. This was my new home. I sank onto the edge of the mattress. the springs groaning in protest, my soaked duffel bag slumping to the floor beside me. The numbness that had carried me from my parents' doorstep was beginning to recede, replaced by a deep, shuddering cold that had nothing to do with the rain. My father's words echoed in my head, a black hole of wasted potential. It was his favorite refrain, the chorus to the soundtrack of my life, to Frank and Linda Miller. I was a perpetual disappointment. I wasn't a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer. I was Tyler, the 25-year-old barista. They saw my job at the Daily Grind as a teenage phase that had stretched embarrassingly into adulthood. They didn't see the pride I took in it, the perfect microfoam on a cappuccino, the complex notes of a single-origin pour-over, the brief, genuine connections I made with the regulars who shuffled in every morning. They didn't see that I was saving every spare dollar, tucking it away for the dream I barely dared to speak aloud, opening my own small-batch coffee roastery. The book in my bag, From Bean to Business, was my Bible. To them, it was just more evidence of my refusal to face the real world. Their real world had become a bitter, constricted place. My dad, Frank, had been a foreman at the local lumber mill for 30 years until it downsized him into an early retirement 5 years ago. He took the severance package, but he lost his identity. He went from a man who commanded a crew to a man who commanded the TV remote. The pride that once came from his work curdled into a brittle, defensive anger. He saw my slow, careful path as an insult to his own sudden irrelevance. My mother, Linda, worked part-time at a department store, her smiles for customers dissolving the second she walked through our front door. The financial strain of the mortgage, of keeping up appearances in their quiet, suburban Portland neighborhood, had sanded away her softness, leaving behind a woman perpetually braced for the next disaster. And I was, in their eyes, the next disaster. Or rather, a constant, low-grade one. Every choice I made was wrong. Going to community college instead of a 4-year university was settling. Working to save money instead of taking on student loan debt was lacking ambition. My passion for coffee was a silly hobby. The foreclosure they'd mentioned tonight wasn't a lie. I knew they were struggling. I'd seen the letters from the bank, hastily hidden under piles of junk mail, but I'd been paying them $400 a month in rent, buying my own food, covering my own bills. I thought I was helping. I see now I was wrong. My presence wasn't a help. It was a reminder, a 25-year-old, 6-foot-tall symbol of their inability to launch a child successfully into the orbit they'd envisioned. My sister, Chloe, had seen the writing on the wall years ago. She was 3 years older, smarter, and more ruthless. The day she got her acceptance letter to UCLA, she packed her bags and never looked back. Our phone calls were infrequent, always tinged with her gentle pity. "How are you holding up, Ty?" she'd ask, and I could hear the unspoken words. "How are you still surviving in that house?" She'd escaped. I had stayed, believing, stupidly, that I could fix it, that if I was quiet enough, helpful enough, invisible enough, I could absorb their unhappiness and we could be a family. Lying back on the lumpy bed, I stared at the water-stained ceiling. The anger was there, a hot coil in my gut, but beneath it was a grief so profound it felt like it might split me in two. They were my parents. The same people who taught me to ride a bike, who cheered at my Little League games, who told me I could be anything I wanted to be. Where did those people go? When did their love become so conditional, so transactional? When did I become a financial liability? The night dragged on. I didn't sleep. I just replayed the last decade of my life, seeing every snide comment, every dismissive wave of the hand, every disappointed sigh not as isolated incidents, but as bricks being laid, one by one, to build the wall that now stood between us. Finally, as the gray light of dawn began to filter through the grimy window, a sense of finality washed over me. It was over. That part of my life was done. I sat up, my body aching. I needed a plan. I needed coffee. I needed something. My eyes fell on my jeans, slung over a chair. The corner of the lottery ticket was peeking out of the back pocket. I snorted, a humorless puff of air, the ultimate symbol of pathetic hope. For the hell of it, I pulled out my phone and the crumpled ticket. I checked the numbers. It felt like a fitting end to the worst night of my life to confirm, in black and white, that my 1 in a million shot was, like everything else, a failure. I typed the lottery's website into my phone's browser, my fingers clumsy. The winning numbers loaded on the screen. I held the ticket up to the dim light, my heart pounding, a slow, heavy rhythm of pure, unadulterated despair. I wasn't expecting anything. I was just going through the motions. One last kick from the universe before I had to figure out how to live on $87.34. My breath hitched. My eyes scanned the numbers on the ticket, then darted back to the phone screen. 14, 22, 36, 48, 51, Powerball 07. On the screen, gleaming in sterile digital font, were the same numbers: 14, 22, 36, 48, 51, and the red Powerball 07. It didn't make sense. My sleep-deprived brain refused to process the information. This had to be a mistake. A hallucination, a cruel prank by a universe that was clearly enjoying my suffering. I closed the browser, my thumb shaking, and reopened it. I navigated back to the official state lottery website, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The numbers were still there, unchanged, undeniable. A wave of vertigo washed over me. I wasn't happy. I wasn't excited. I was terrified. A laugh escaped my lips, but it was a jagged, hysterical sound that sounded alien in the quiet room. I stumbled to the grimy bathroom sink and splashed cold water on my face, staring at my reflection in the cracked mirror. The same tired, lost-looking kid stared back, his eyes wide with a new kind of fear. This couldn't be real. People like me didn't win. People who had just been disowned and had less than $100 to their name didn't suddenly win a $90 million jackpot. Life didn't work that way. It was a straight line of disappointments, not a sudden, absurd vertical launch into the stratosphere. My phone, lying on the bed, began to buzz, and I flinched as if it were a venomous snake. The screen lit up with a picture of my sister, Chloe. My hand trembled as I answered. "Ty, oh my God, are you okay?" Her voice was a torrent of worried energy. "I just got off the phone with Mom. She was hysterical. She said you two had a huge fight and you just left. She said you screamed at them and walked out without a word. What the hell happened?" The floor seemed to drop out from under me. I leaned against the damp wall for support. The phone pressed hard against my ear. She said I screamed at them. Yeah. And Dad, too. He said you were completely ungrateful, that you threw your keys at him and stormed out because they asked you to fix your car. They're telling everyone you abandoned them. Aunt Carol already called Mom to offer support. And they're painting this picture of themselves as these poor, wounded parents whose monster of a son just up and vanished. A cold, sharp anger, unlike anything I had ever felt before, sliced through the fear and confusion. It was clean and hard and bright. This was a new betrayal, so much deeper and more calculated than the fight itself. Kicking me out was an act of anger, of desperation. This was a strategic campaign to rewrite history, to assassinate my character to their friends and family, to ensure that they were the victims and I was the villain. They hadn't just pushed me out the door, they were salting the earth behind me so nothing could ever grow there again. "Chloe, that's not what happened," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. They threw me out. Frank called me a parasite. Mom said I was a financial liability they needed to cut loose. They literally shoved me out the door and locked it behind me. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Chloe finally spoke, her voice was low and furious. "Oh my God, I knew it. I knew it wasn't you. They're spiraling. Ty, it's worse than I thought." She took a shaky breath. "There's something else. They didn't tell me this. I overheard Dad talking in the background. The foreclosure. It's not a threat anymore. The final notice came yesterday. They have to be out of the house by the end of next week. The auction is already scheduled. The air left my lungs. End of next week." They had kicked their own son out onto the street, knowing they themselves were only days away from the exact same fate. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. It wasn't about pushing me to be better. It wasn't tough love. It was a desperate, ugly act by two people drowning in their own failure, choosing to throw their son overboard first, just to feel a moment's relief before the waves consumed them too. They weren't just parents who had failed me. They were fundamentally broken people. "Ty, are you still there?" Chloe asked, her voice soft with worry. I looked from the cracked mirror to the crumpled lottery ticket lying on the bedspread. Its flimsy paper seemed to pulse with a terrifying power. $90 million. Enough to solve every problem they had. Enough to buy that house 10 times over. The universe wasn't just playing a joke. It was conducting an experiment. It had taken away my family and then handed me the power of a god. "I'm here. Chloe," I whispered, the words feeling foreign in my own mouth. "I'm here." I hung up the phone. I was no longer the victim shivering in a cheap motel. I was something else entirely. I was the man holding the winning ticket, and my parents, the ones who had just disowned and slandered me, were about to be homeless. The board was set. The pieces were in place. And for the first time in my life, it was my move. The silence in the motel room after I hung up with Chloe was absolute. It was a vacuum, swallowing the sound of my own ragged breathing, the distant rumble of traffic, everything. All that existed was the truth, laid bare and brutal. They were being foreclosed on. They had lied to everyone. They had thrown me away in their panic, a piece of jettisoned cargo, and I had $90 million. I slid down the wall until I was sitting on the grimy floor, the phone slipping from my numb fingers. I stared at the lottery ticket on the bed. It didn't look like salvation anymore. It looked like a judgment, a cosmic test I hadn't studied for. My first instinct, raw and primal, was to do nothing, to simply vanish, change my name, move to another country, and let the foreclosure happen. I could let them face the consequences of their actions, let them call Aunt Carol and explain why they were suddenly sleeping on her couch, let them feel the humiliation I felt standing on that porch in the rain. The thought was satisfying, a flash of hot, righteous fire. I could let them become homeless, just as they'd made me. But then, a different, more insidious thought crept in. What if I saved them? What if I called a lawyer, set up an anonymous trust, and paid off their mortgage? A grand, magnanimous gesture. I could be the better person, rising above their pettiness. I could prove, once and for all, that I was not the parasite they claimed I was. I could fix their problem, and maybe, just maybe, it would fix us. Maybe my mother's coldness would thaw, and my father's anger would recede. Maybe I could buy back the family I thought I'd lost. I actually considered it. For a full, agonizing minute, I let the fantasy play out. I pictured their shock, their relief, their tearful gratitude. I pictured a Thanksgiving dinner where the resentment was gone, replaced by a grudging respect. And then I remembered my mother's eyes as she called me a financial liability. I heard my father's voice calling me a black hole. I saw them so clearly standing together, rehearsing their lies to Chloe, painting me as a monster to protect their own fragile pride. They hadn't just disowned me. They had tried to erase the good man I was trying to be, and the fantasy of a happy family shattered. Their love, I realized with chilling certainty, couldn't be bought, not even for $90 million. If I saved them anonymously, they would never know. They would learn nothing. If I saved them and revealed myself, they wouldn't see it as love or forgiveness. They would see it as a transaction. They would resent me for having the power to save them. The dynamic wouldn't change. It would just be inverted. I would become the bank, and they would be the debtors. The resentment would fester, just in a different direction. I would be forever trapped. The son who had to buy his parents' affection. An emotional collapse I didn't know was coming finally hit me. The anger, the grief, the shock, it all crested at once. A sob tore from my chest, a raw, ugly sound of a boy who had just realized his parents were truly gone. I wasn't just grieving the people they had become, I was grieving the people they once were, the family I once had. I wept for the boy who made his father a mug in pottery class, for the teenager who believed his parents' praise. I cried until my throat was raw and my eyes burned, purging the last dregs of hope that things could ever go back to the way they were. When the tears finally subsided, I was left with a strange and terrifying calm. The emotional storm had passed, and in its wake, the landscape of my soul was altered. The grief was still there, a cold, heavy stone in my gut, but it was no longer overwhelming. It was just a fact, a piece of the new reality. And in that new reality, a new idea began to form. It wasn't born of hot revenge or a naive desire for reconciliation. It was born of the cold, hard clarity that had settled in my bones, the house, the auction. My fingers, no longer trembling, reached for my laptop. I opened it, the screen casting a pale blue light on my face. With a few keystrokes, I found the Benton County website for public auctions. And there it was, my childhood home, 1284 Chestnut Drive. A sterile listing, complete with a grainy photo of the front porch where I had stood just hours before. The auction was in 6 days. Online bidding, minimum bid starting at the outstanding mortgage balance, $187,432.19. I looked at the number. It seemed so small, insignificant. A new plan clicked into place. So perfect, so symmetrical. It felt like it had been written in the stars. I wasn't going to let them be homeless. I wasn't going to save them out of the goodness of my heart. I was going to do something else. I was going to reclaim what was mine. Not just the house, but my own narrative, my own power. They kicked me out of their house. Fine. I would buy it. I would become their landlord. They called me a liability. Fine. They would have to come to me, their former liability, to ask for a roof over their heads. The script would be flipped so completely it would give them whiplash. The power dynamic would not just be inverted, it would be shattered and rebuilt from the ground up. With me as the architect, this wasn't about forgiveness. It wasn't even about simple revenge. It was about justice. A cold, poetic, and absolute justice. I picked up my phone again. I didn't search for therapists or family counselors. I Googled top financial and real estate lawyers in Portland. My resolve hardened into something unbreakable. I was no longer Tyler Miller, the heartbroken barista. I was a force of nature they had unleashed. They wanted me to stand on my own 2 feet. They had no idea I was about to own the ground beneath theirs. The 6 days between the motel room and the eviction were a blur of caffeine, legal jargon, and adrenaline. I hired the best financial advisory firm in Portland, a team of stone-faced professionals who didn't blink when I walked in looking like a stray and told them my situation. They helped me claim the prize through a blind trust, the Serenity Now Trust, a small, bitter joke for myself to keep my name out of the public record. They handled the wire transfers, the tax planning, everything. My man was a sharp, silver-haired lawyer named Arthur Davies, whose entire demeanor screamed quiet, lethal competence. When I told him my plan for the house, He didn't praise or condemn it. He simply nodded and said, "The auction is online. We can secure the property without issue. What are your instructions for after the acquisition?" On the morning of the eviction, I didn't feel triumph. I felt a hollow, vibrating calm. I wore a tailored navy suit Mr. Davies had insisted I buy. It felt like a costume. As we drove my new car, a sleek, understated black Audi, into my old neighborhood, I saw it. A large, ugly yellow moving truck was parked at the curb in front of 1284 Chestnut Drive. 2 men in dirty overalls were carrying out boxes. My mother's prized china cabinet sat forlornly on the lawn. My heart gave a painful thud, a flicker of the old empathy. I ruthlessly suppressed it. Mr. Davies parked across the street. "Are you ready, Mr. Miller?" he asked, his voice neutral. I looked at the house. My house. "Yes," I said. "Let's go." We walked up the driveway. My father was standing on the porch, directing the movers with a kind of frantic, desperate energy. He was yelling at one of them about scratching a side table. He looked older than he had a week ago. His face was gray with stress. When he saw me, his expression curdled from frantic anger into pure, undiluted rage. "You!" he spat, taking a step toward me. "You've got a lot of nerve showing your face here. Come to gloat. Come to see what you've done to us." My mother appeared in the doorway behind him, her face pale and drawn. She saw my suit, the expensive car, Mr. Davies standing calmly beside me. Her eyes narrowed in confusion. "Tyler? Oh, what is this?" "Hello, Frank, Linda," I said. My voice was steady. It didn't even sound like my own. "I'm not here to gloat." "Then what the hell are you here for?" Frank roared. "To kick us when we're down. Your mother called you. You know, left you messages. We thought you might have been sleeping in your car and you ignored us." "I was busy," I said, the words as cold and hard as river stones. "I had to handle a significant financial transaction." Mr. Davies stepped forward, extending a crisp business card to my father. Frank just stared at it, refusing to take it. "Mr. and Mrs. Miller," Davies said, his voice polite but firm. "My name is Arthur Davies. I am legal counsel for the Serenity Now Trust, which as of 9:07 a.m. yesterday became the sole proprietor of this property." The world seemed to stop. The movers paused, a box halfway to the truck. The sound of birdsong from the maple tree seemed unnaturally loud. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. "What? That's not possible. The bank. The auction." "The trust placed the winning bid," Davies continued smoothly. "All outstanding debts have been cleared. The deed was transferred this morning. We are here to discuss the terms of your continued residency." Frank's face went from red to a terrifying, waxy white. He looked from Davies to me, the pieces clicking into place behind his eyes with agonizing slowness. "You," he whispered, his voice cracking. "The trust, that's you." I met his gaze. The boy who used to flinch from that glare was gone. "It was a business decision," I said, using their own words like a weapon. "I saw a distressed asset, and I acquired it. A financial liability, you might say." Linda let out a small, strangled gasp. She understood immediately. Frank was still catching up, his mind grappling with the sheer impossibility of it. "Where did you get that kind of money?" he demanded, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and fear. "You're a barista. Did you rob a bank?" "Let's just say I had a sudden windfall," I replied coolly. "But that's not your concern. Your concern is the document Mr. Davies is holding." Davies produced a leather-bound folder and opened it. "My client is prepared to offer you a standard 1-year lease agreement," he said. "At market rate, of course. First and last month's rent due upon signing, plus a security deposit. It will allow you to remain in the home while you get your affairs in order. It's quite a generous offer, under the circumstances." My father stared at me, his mouth opening and closing silently. All the bluster, all the rage, was gone, replaced by a look of such profound, shattering humiliation that it was almost hard to watch. The man who had called me a parasite, who had physically shoved me out of this house, was now being offered the chance to pay rent to me for the privilege of staying. My mother, ever the pragmatist, found her voice first. "Elise," she asked, her voice thin and reedy, "you want us to be your tenants. You need a place to live." I said simply, "I own a place to live. It seems like a clean solution, a simple transaction, no messy emotions." That's when Frank finally broke. The tough, proud foreman, the man of the house, crumpled. His shoulders slumped, and he staggered back against the doorframe as if his legs could no longer support him. He covered his face with his hands, and a raw, guttural sob tore through the quiet morning air. He wasn't just crying. He was weeping with the full-body, soul-crushing despair of a man who has lost everything, most of all his pride, at the hands of the son he despised. Linda looked from her broken husband to me, her eyes wide with a terrifying cocktail of fear, hatred, and dawning, desperate hope. She looked at the lease agreement in Mr. Davies's hands as if it were the only life raft in the middle of a cold, black ocean. The power had not just been reversed, it had been annihilated and remade. And in the wreckage, my father was weeping, my mother was calculating, and I was the landlord, waiting for their decision. The sound of my father's weeping was the sound of a world ending. It wasn't the angry, theatrical sobbing of a man trying to get his way. It was the desolate sound of a spirit breaking. Linda stared at him for a long moment, her face a blank canvas of shock, before her gaze snapped back to me. The pragmatist in her took over. Humiliation was a luxury they couldn't afford right now. Survival was everything. "We'll sign," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She nudged Frank's arm. "Frank, we'll sign the lease." He didn't respond, just continued to cry into his hands. Linda reached out with a trembling hand and took the folder from Mr. Davies. She didn't look at the terms. She didn't ask about the rent amount. She just took a pen from her purse and signed her name on the indicated line with a sharp, jerky motion. I watched her, feeling nothing, no satisfaction, no pity, just a vast, cold emptiness. The climactic moment I had envisioned, the grand reversal, felt hollow. Seeing my father crumble didn't bring me joy. It just made me feel tired. The first month's rent, last month's, and the security deposit are due by the end of the week, Mr. Davies said gently, but with an unmistakable finality. "My office will be in touch to arrange payment." I turned to walk away. My part in this drama was over. "Tyler, wait!" my mother called out, her voice cracking. I stopped but didn't turn around. "Why?" she asked, the single word loaded with 100 unasked questions. "Why would you do this to us? Why didn't you just help us? Why this cruelty?" I finally turned to face her. I looked at her, then at my father, who had lowered his hands and was staring at the porch floor, his face streaked with tears and shame. "You asked me to stand on my own 2 feet, I said, my voice low and clear. "You told me it was time I learned about the real world, about financial liabilities and cutting losses. This is me, standing. This is the real world. You're not my parents anymore. You're my tenants, and I'm your landlord. It's just business." I didn't wait for a reply. I walked back to the car with Mr. Davies, got in, and we drove away, leaving them standing on the porch of a house they no longer owned, surrounded by the boxed-up fragments of their life. I didn't look back in the rearview mirror. In the months that followed, I threw myself into my dream. The Serenity Now Trust, under my anonymous direction, bought a small, beautiful brick building downtown. I didn't just open a roastery, I built a sanctuary. The daily grind became Miller's Reserve. It was a place of warm wood, soft lighting, and the rich, intoxicating aroma of freshly roasted coffee beans. I was there from dawn until long after dusk, sourcing beans, perfecting roasts, training new staff, and greeting customers. The work filled the spaces in me that grief had carved out. It gave me a purpose that had nothing to do with my parents. They paid their rent, on time, every month. The check would arrive in a plain white envelope at the P.O. box Mr. Davies had set up. No note, no message, just a check, signed by Linda Miller. It was the only communication we had. About 6 months later, Chloe flew up from California. She walked into Miller's Reserve, her eyes wide with amazement at what I had built. We sat at a corner table, and she slid a photograph across the polished wood surface. It was of our parents, taken at a recent family gathering she'd attended. They looked diminished, smaller. The anger in my father's eyes had been replaced by a permanent, haunted sadness. The hard lines around my mother's mouth had softened into a constant look of worry. "They're different," Chloe said quietly. "Dad, he's quiet now, all the time. Mom tries to pretend everything is normal, but she calls me 3 times a week, just to talk. She never did that before. She asks about you, not directly. She'll say things like, 'I wonder if Tyler is warm enough this winter,' or 'I hope he's eating well.'" I stared at the photograph. I felt a pang, not of regret, but of a deep, aching sorrow for what was irreparably broken. The justice I had sought had been delivered. They were living with the consequences of their actions every single day. But there were no winners. Did I do the right thing? "Chloe," I asked. The question I hadn't allowed myself to voice. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine. "You did what you had to do to survive, Ty." "They pushed you off a cliff. You just learned to fly on the way down, Chet. What happens next? That's up to you." What happens next? The question hangs in the air, potent and unanswered. I still own the house. They still live there, paying rent to their estranged son. The power is mine, but holding it feels heavy. Some days, I think about selling the house, just to sever the final tie. On other days, a strange, residual sense of duty keeps me from putting them out on the street. I haven't forgiven them. I don't think I ever can. The love I had for them died on that porch, but maybe, in its place, something new can eventually grow. Not love, but a kind of peace, a quiet understanding. They kicked me out. I hit the lottery. And now, we are all homeless in our own way, adrift from the family we once were, living in the wreckage of our choices, trying to figure out how to build a new life from the ashes.